in the tradition that TED involves the personal as well as what you're trying to change in the world, the remarks that I've kind of assembled will start from kind of my own personal journey and then get into why I think the internet is deeply interesting when it comes to how do we change the world. Some of you in the audience know that when I was here as an undergraduate, actually I've been in this auditorium before, not speaking, and my goal has been and actually remains to be what I call a public intellectual. And it sounds kind of pretentious, and maybe some people think it is, but it's basically what I think that the public intellectual does in society is help us reflect on who we are and who we should be as individuals and as a society. And originally, I was going to be an academic, trained in an academic institution, went to Oxford, went over to study philosophy and think that I was going to write books and articles and whatnot, because the motivation that I had was very much like the ideas worth spreading. It was kind of a question of, kind of how do you generate ideas that cause differential behavior in people. The challenge that I found personally in the academic side was that in order to prove your credentials at first, to prove your credentials, you write books that 50 people will read. And actually, I was interested in how do you change the lives of millions of people. And so I was like, okay, I'm not going to be an academic because I want to get to that right away. And I started studying things, and I went, okay, well, I like software because software is scalable. And I like the Silicon Valley entrepreneurship because you're creating new things. And part of the impulse that drives me is that creation. And basically, I came back, I kind of looked around, and I went, oh, this online thing is really important. I didn't realize some of the remarks I'm going to make. I didn't realize how important it was, but it was like, okay, this is the interesting new thing. I'm going to go do that. And what the arc of my kind of personal discovery, which gets to kind of these remarks for how I think the internet is useful for philanthropic movements, is from a kind of an initial desire of like kind of how is life meaningful and how do you change the world, and how do you, when you look back upon your life and you kind of write your own personal obituary kind of week by week as you're thinking about what impact you're having on the world around you, I went from, okay, ideas worth spreading is important, remains important, but also how do you create structures and institutions and inertia that can scale to getting to millions of people. And the thing that is kind of in the broad arc of what's most interesting about internet is that you have this kind of low-cost structure that can get you to millions and tens of millions of people in a kind of scalable way that, on one hand, on the .com side, has a whole bunch of interesting attributes for entrepreneurs and for finance and for how you generate economics money, but on the other hand, is deeply important in kind of cause-based organizations. And the fundamental reason is because this is all about people. It's actually more about people. The internet, I think, is actually, in many deep ways, more about people than it is technology, because everyone has a kind of presence. And so basically, I'm very deeply associated with kind of the whole Web 2.0 movement. I'm going to say how the Web 1.0 to 2.0 has touched three different aspects of how philanthropy, or frankly, actually, I prefer the ring cause-based movements, can actually change. And what are some remarks about that? So when I invest in a .com startup, I look for three things. I look for scalability, I look for margins, an ability to have a business model that ultimately is interesting. It's not actually always, it's almost never clear from the beginning. And how do you create defensibility in the structure? Well, these three attributions, I think, by the way, reminder, turn off cell phones. These three attributes are the same things that make causes now deeply interesting, because what happens as you move from Web 1.0 to Web 2.0 is it's a movement by which everyone is online. Everyone is there with their identity. Everyone is there with their relationships. Everyone is there with the things that matter to them. It's not, Web 1.0 was I kind of go to this foreign place, this chat room on AOL or something, where all this weird behavior happens. Web 2.0 is about how do we, with our real identities, interact with each other and live with each other. That's the reason why you have, sharing on Facebook, you have finding the right information, or people on LinkedIn, et cetera, et cetera. These are actually how do we constitute with our communities as they exist. Well, the thing that's critical and important, the thing that's critical and important about thinking about this in terms that comes to causes is a large majority of people care deeply about what impact they have in the world. And your ability to create a scalable system that easily connects and makes that available is the thing that not only powers the .com really interesting businesses, but also powers a set of very interesting things from the cause side of the thing. So the three types, one of them is kind of new kinds of nonprofits. The second is new kinds of infrastructure. Mozilla is one of those. And the third is what corporations are actually able to do, especially internet corporations, now that they have millions of constituencies and a combination. So in the first, the kinds of stuff that I got involved with are like Kiva, Donors Choose, Do Something, which is a new breed of nonprofits that use the fact that you have a very cheap, scalable model to get to millions of people. And how do you combine those millions of people to have very interesting action and effect in the world? And for example, Kiva, right? It's eBay for microfinance. It's individuals providing loans to other individuals in order to make their, buy a taxi, buy a cow, set up a grocery store to kind of attack a network effect, a network. And this is actually, I think, one of the things that's really interesting and new about the internet is that you can go after essentially a network of people. Donors Choose is financing projects in classrooms where essentially you can say, okay, I want to support that classroom and what this teacher's doing. And Do Something is helping high school students actually get involved with and choose and drive philanthropic projects and tasks. And each of these mass coordinations is done with a very cheap root infrastructure because it's an internet site is not that expensive to run and make happen, and it's that scalable thing that the same thing that makes .coms interesting to invest in is the same thing that drives the cause-based. And so the terms that we use in these things is like marketplaces. It's a marketplace for microfinance. It's a network of high school students, doing philanthropic work. And so that's one area where the internet suddenly allows a cheap, scaling, sustainable kind of structure that can assemble a great impact. Second area is things like Mozilla, Creative Commons, et cetera, which is the infrastructure. And it isn't just the high brand ones, the ones you think about like Mozilla and Firefox, which is try to create a free internet. Creative Commons have a legal infrastructure by which we can all publish content and we can create interesting new things on the internet. But also things like Drupal, which allows, for example, organizations like nonprofits to create cheap kind of community and communications-driven websites to help coordinate their kind of community for their audience. And these sorts of things, this kind of infrastructure also is made possible because what happens when you get this kind of, how do you get the delivery of this kind of cheap open source code and everything else? Well, and how do you get the distributed collaboration upon it? That all comes from the internet. The third area is corporations. And one of the things that I think is really interesting is I think that corporations now, at least internet corporations, I specialize in consumer internet stuff, and I think there's always been some interesting play in corporations, but they can create, because they're dealing with kind of communities, interactions with millions of people, they can actually make part of the philanthropic or the cause-based desires people have part of what they're actually doing on their website. And I think that you have everything from the cause-based app on Facebook where you basically have a badge or identity and you can at least kind of share that, oh, we all share this particular cause. You've got Twitter with politics and freedom of speech to kind of projects of helping water, and then you've got kind of LinkedIn, where what we do today is we say, okay, well, if you're a nonprofit, we don't have this totally scalable yet, but it's like make the services free for finding resources and information, and ultimately we'll be helping professionals take their skills and apply them in the right way, because that's the kind of thing that we do. These three arcs are all made possible by the fact that you have the internet, which is everyone's connected with their identity and their relationships and as a participant. And the things that I think get particularly interesting is not just that communications infrastructure, but how it is actually now scalable and sustainable. Because by having a low-cost infrastructure, by which the fact that millions of people can actually interact, find financing, get interactions with each other, these kinds of connections that people form, and then begin to bake that into their identity in terms of how do they interact with other people, now means that you can actually mobilize tons of people. And so now the challenge will be getting it right. One of the things that you'll see, I think, when you take a look at this in depth, and probably many of you, since you have interest in this, already have, is that the ones that succeed the fastest out the gate are the ones that are the kind of the equivalent to the internet pure play, which is that they go, okay, for example, it's like, okay, Kiva, like all we do is we're doing the kind of online marketplace, we create the financing, we let that kind of drive and go. When you begin to get to you're changing people's behavior, you're affecting where they go on Saturday afternoon, that's a harder change to make, but still very valuable. And I think what you'll see is as the people get familiar with the notion of being in a network, being in a marketplace, building upon the platform of these sorts of tools, that you will see a continual evolution of things. And the reason it's sustainable is because a cheap infrastructure that can motivate millions of people. Now, part of what I think will get interesting about this is that I think that with kind of entrepreneurship, in terms of it's not just the communication of ideas, but how do you set up institutions? And this was kind of, as I mentioned, was my arc from kind of starting as an academic, thinking, well, what's really important is I come up with an idea and I write it in an article and I publish it, and then that idea causes people to do things. And that can be a great thing. There's no detriment in that. But what we're really looking for is how do you actually coordinate the actions of millions of people so that we actually create a better world? And part of that dynamic is that it's not a command and control structure. It's not a, one person stands here and tells everyone, you now do this. I mean, there is the military, but that tends to work in a different way than the kind of thing that we're looking for in something that's actually sustainable for a very broad-based network set of causes. So what I actually think that where the kind of the entrepreneurship in the internet comes in is say, well, okay, if we can create lots and lots of kind of microgroups, and this targeted at hunger, this targeted education, this targeted at clean water, this targeted at, and then people participate in those networks and then can organize themselves effectively. So I think part of what we're going to see now more of is how does that work get easily chunked and distributed into a large set of actions. So for example, applications on iPhones that say, hey, everyone show up and take a picture of this, or help out with this. I mean, one of the things that I always think is I recommend is to go and participate in some of these activities, because, like, for example, when I and some of my friends were kind of packing some food for kind of giving out to people, because these are tough times, it was like, wait a minute, we could create a marketplace for this, right? And there could be a really interesting way of constructing a distributed effort. And that kind of distributed effort of ideas and of coordination, communication, and of identity is, I think, what the internet makes all this stuff possible. Now, if I to hazard to look at the future, part of the one expression I frequently say about the future is it's sooner and stranger than you think. So you always almost look like a fool when you're making predictions of the future. But I'll hazard it anyway. The key thing, I think, about looking at this is it won't just be kind of a communications infrastructure that we kind of coordinate on top-down projects. Like, someone with some resources studies and finds that water is important and then invests in a website and, creates stuff and then it goes happen. That's all great. It should continue to happen. But one of, I think, the things that I think will be brilliant about the internet will be the bottom-up boiling up of, here's a problem or here's an issue. and that kind of coordinated intelligence that will come up that will also suggest what problems we should coalesce efforts around. And that kind of collective ideation or kind of crowdsourcing of ideas will, I think, be one of the interesting next steps that happens in the kind of cause-based movements. And it's one of the things I'm kind of looking for across all the different cause-based stuff I do. And with that, I hope you have a great day today. I'm deeply honored to be part of this, and I think we all care about this a lot.
Oh, wow.